between the rich countries and the poor countries. I have 3 points to back up my ideas. First, we have seen an expansion in world trade, but the trade has also seen increasing inequality between the developed countries and developing countries. Second, globalization enables those developed countries to exploit the natural resources, the cheap labors, and raw materials of the developing countries. And third, since the developing countries becoming more and more dependent on the developed countries, they become vulnerable to international financial turbulence and thus intensify the poverty within themselves. So based on these 3 points, I believe that globalization is widening the gap between the rich countries and the poor countries.
Good. Let's go straight to the debating panelists.
Well, you've taken a very difficult position to defend, particularly since you're Chinese. China is, in fact, the biggest beneficiary of globalization. I'd be interested to know how you say that's not the case.
I think China is only one successful example, but there are a lot of other unsuccessful examples. You know, China is not a very simple developed country. China has a very good tradition of education. That is why China can take advantage of the globalization. Problem is within the country itself. It is their tradition of education. It is within their tradition of training those talented people. It is not the beneficiary, necessarily the beneficiary of globalization.
Globalization hasn't reached every country. There are countries where they're still affected by trade barriers. China is not. It's joined the WTO. It's reduced those barriers. What's lacking is more globalization. That's how you reduce the poverty in the third world.
You said that because of globalization, so people will try to remove those trade barriers, and that is how they can enjoy the fruit of globalization.
No, globalization means the reduction of trade barriers. That's what it's all about.
But think about those countries. Those countries depending on exporting raw materials to the developed countries, do they really enjoy the benefit of
Actually, they are enjoying the benefits of the globalization. In fact, what they have got is raw materials. So why not using that raw material in exchange for more advanced technologies, more education, and better life for people instead of just waiting there? And also, I want to point out, I'm not sure if I agree with you that poor countries or developing countries are being divided as to simple developing countries and complicated developing countries, which you were suggesting.
Sorry, maybe I used the wrong word, because I think China is a very good example. So it is different from some other developing countries. And about your opinion, you mentioned that exporting raw material can really help those countries, but I don't agree with you. Sometimes exploiting the natural resources can mean the contamination to their ecological environment. And I want to ask you, how long can those natural resources last?
I'm not saying exploiting. I'm saying exporting.
No, I think exploiting, maybe I used the wrong word, but if you want to use those raw materials, if you want to make use of those raw materials, although it is still very controversial, but I think it will bring the contamination to the environment, thus hampering their sustainable development.
What you're saying is it's not globalization widening the gap between rich and poor. It is mismanagement. And misadaptation.
I know it is inevitable. I know it is inevitable, but not because it is inevitable, so it is good. Because globalization is still in the early stage, and everything in the early stage is not perfect. We need to do something to improve it, but we don't need to say that we think it is totally good, we think it is perfect. We are telling lies to ourselves. We are concealing the facts to ourselves. So I think in this early stage, it is not perfect. It can also cause a lot of problems. But we hope a better future. It doesn't mean that it is perfect in this stage. It also has shortcomings.
What are you proposing then? Should we stop globalization and go back to isolated countries?
No, I didn't say we should stop globalization. I just stating the fact. Nowadays it is not perfect, but we can wait. Maybe tomorrow, maybe a few months, maybe 100 years.
We should stop the debating round.
Sorry, people become emotional now.
Our global time system tells us time is up. Right.
It was really lively. I really enjoyed it. Now the judges are scoring, and let's hear what
the commentators have to say.
Both Xiao Wei and I were wondering, who is John Mueller?
John Mueller, he graduated from Harvard Divinity School, and he opened a public charity, and he wrote a book about called Sabbath. Try to warn people, try to remind people of the importance of having a rest each week.
Okay, the reason I ask is when you quote somebody in a speech, and this is again true of many contestants in this year's competition, it helps to identify the source so that people in the audience who are not immediately familiar with the source will understand why you're quoting it.
I would like to put that part in this, but 2 minutes, I have time limit.
Well, that's true. The important thing is that you knew that. So if you're giving a speech in another venue, then you would be sure to identify the source for the audience, and that's the important thing.
I would do that. I would definitely do that. Thank you for your advice.
Okay, good job.
We have the scores for contestant number 22.
Let's take a look. The highest and the lowest are eliminated. And Dong Qingyun has 94.643. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Thank you very much.
Well, now we're going to invite contestant number 23 of this competition, Dai Yuerong.
Start the prepared speech. Please go.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I used to be a person who gives up easily. When it's too early to get up, I would sleep in. When I carried some heavy bags and only 10 minutes walk, I would sneak into a taxi. But for the past 1 year, there is one thing, one real challenge in which I didn't give up. It has helped me to find a new spirit within me. I worked for a whole year making a documentary on autism, or 自闭症 as we say in Chinese. I can still remember the first time I went into the classroom with autistic children. They were screaming and shouting and fighting and jumping all over the place. It was total chaos. Some scratched or even beat me. I was scared to death. I felt like giving up. Children are born with autism and cannot make proper contact with the outside world. And even worse,